Hi everyone, welcome to the TriEssence martial art channel. First and foremost, I wish everyone a belated Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And let's hope that in this new year that everything will be better than last year. 2020 was pretty bad. Unfortunately, so far, it doesn't look it's getting any better. I'm not sure how badly your residential country is being affected by the second wave of coronavirus. But here in South Africa, our second wave is actually worse than the first. I think at the peak of our first wave, we were having 5,000 new cases a day. Currently on our second wave, we're having from 8,000 to 12,000 new cases a day. And also, you might have heard already, South Africa is one of the origin places of a new strain of COVID-19 virus, which is more deadlier and harder to treat than the previous ones. So overall, beginning of this 2021 isn't looking so great, but let's hope that, as time goes by, things will start to get better. And no matter where you are, I wish you healthy and safe and unaffected by this pandemic as much as possible. Alright, so this will be our first video for the new year, and it will be a video on the topic that I've never talked about before, really, which is gonna be, as the title suggests, about myself. Now, in the past, I've avoided really, talking extensively about this because I find this to be kind of pretentious, right? I don't want to come across as someone, who is pretentious. However, in the past few months, especially after my video on Chen Xiaowang, and then later on, my videos on Adam Messner, I've got a lot of hate comments, and some of them basically questions my credential in, talking about other martial artists. One particular, says that, he looked at my Facebook and, I basically is an artist who is mildly interested in Chinese martial arts, something to that effect. Well, firstly, it is not my fault that I draw decent pictures, if I might say so myself, but that has nothing to do with my qualification within Chinese martial arts. It is not mutually exclusive. One can be decent at painting and a devoted Chinese martial artist. So obviously, as I've always said in my channel, if you have been following, that I don't really give a flying donkey about haters, and I don't try to convince them because, as Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson once said, you cannot use logic and reason to get someone out of an argument that he did not use logic and reason to get himself into in the first place. And that is a long and fancy way of saying that you can't reason with people who have no reason, and you can't use logic to convince someone that has no logic. So I'm not here to convince the haters that whatever they say about me is incorrect. However, that which is why initially I did not really respond to those comments. I didn't just provide my credentials the moment they questioned it, because I think that's just pointless. However, upon reflecting on everything, I realized that there might be other viewers who are not haters, but might still like to know my background in Chinese martial arts. Now, I haven't done this in the past because I believe the information and knowledge that I'm sharing should speak for itself, right? It's almost like if you have two scientists that have never met each other before, they're not going to start off the conversation by flunking out their degree, where they got a PhD, where they did their masters. Those are not important. Two scientists who never met each other, all they have to do is start a conversation about science, and they will let their knowledge, the equations, the laws of physics speak for themselves, and then they will know how much qualification each of them have, and how well they are versed in this field. And so that has always been my intention, is that through the knowledge and understanding I'm sharing, it should make sense to those who understand what real knowledge looks like. But unfortunately, martial art, unlike science, is very convoluted. Okay, if you study science or medical or whatever else, no matter which corner of the world you study at, as long as you study in the proper institute, you will gain similar knowledge and therefore can understand and communicate with others from the same field. In Chinese martial art, however, that's not the case. I've said in my past videos, if you met 100 different guys doing Tai Chi and ask them about Tai Chi, they will give you 100 different answers. And someone might say, that just means there are no right answers, there are many possibilities. Well, that's actually not correct. While there are no one defining exact answer like math, there are probabilities, but the popularity range, it has a range. There can't be 100 different, absolutely completely different answers. And when that happens, it just means that 99% of them are having the wrong answer. Okay, and that's how convoluted the Chinese traditional martial art world is. And that's not to say that there are no real correct answers. For example, I've come across a lot of internal practitioners, some are legit, some are not, and gradually through the years, I've basically summarized the common ground and common agreement that I can have with other legit internal martial artists, whether it's from Xingyi, other lineages of Taiji, Wuxing Tongbei, Yiquan, right? So the legit ones, we all can agree on some similar concept, and that's where I eventually derived the four fundamental forces of internal. And this video isn't about the four forces, so this is to say that when there are 100 different answers for the same question, it doesn't mean there are 100 different correct answers. It just means that a lot of them are misinformed. And I thought that by sharing the correct answer, I'll be able to prove my words or my background credential to my viewers. But unfortunately, I realized that, this level of understanding might not be that common among people who watch YouTube. And a lot of people who watch the channel might be completely new and doesn't know how to judge between a correct knowledge and incorrect one, which is why in this video I am going to basically talk about my background, credentials, and experience in Chinese martial arts, so that should you be a viewer that's new to the channel and want to know if I'm qualified to talk on the topics that I talk about, then this video should put your mind at ease, I hope. Well, so the first thing I'd like to address, right, is that someone made a comment saying that they can't take someone seriously when they're shooting a video in their backyard. Now that's clearly someone who has never really understood the actual traditional Chinese martial art culture. Because back in the Qing dynasty all the way up to the Republic era, majority of the most recognized and respected Chinese martial art masters taught in their backyard. Even the Yang family, who was one of the most well-off martial art families at the time, they taught in the backyard, right? The group class was taught in the Central Park in Beijing, a public park, but the indoor students, the disciples, they were taught in a private class within their own backyard, or in the front courtyard, and then the more special students that trained with their own sons, they were taught at the backyard. So there's actually nothing bad about teaching or training or modern standard shooting a video in the backyard. If you expect any decent martial artist to shoot a video in a martial arts school, that is a very Western mentality, right? I mean, sure, in Japan, they had dojos ever since, before the Meiji era and so forth, but that has never been the culture in China. So if you only recognize someone's content if they make a video in a very fancy school, then you are clearly superficial and doesn't understand the true essence of Chinese martial arts. Now, even to this day, when I go back to Beijing and train with my master, we either train in the park or I train in his home. Right, here's a picture of a place where I spend about 3 days a week, and each day I go from 10 o'clock in the morning to about 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. I spend in this small room that's about 2 meter by 3 meter, right? And that's the only venue that I spend when I'm training with my Wuxing Tongbei master. And I'll be standing there doing training all the time, and he'll be sitting there having tea and then giving me critiques. And this has always been how Chinese traditional martial art has been taught. No one actually in this community cares about fancy school. We only care about our skill and what kind of knowledge is passed down. So I do hope that my viewers will be less superficial and pay more attention to the knowledge that I'm sharing rather than what kind of fancy outfit I'm wearing or what kind of fancy school I have. And if you've been following my channel for many years, you will also know that I used to rent a space in a studio in Santon. But unfortunately, I had to let that go because every year I spent 3 months training in China for myself. And at some point, I also started to participate in a cinematic TV series called Warrior. And I spent about 4 to 6 months in Cape Town shooting in that series. So that essentially is more than half the year that I'm not actually in Johannesburg and not running classes. So even though I was still paying the owner rents, but at some point he just got upset with me because I was never there, and he said, I don't care about money, but you're not respecting my space, and therefore I'm rather gonna, rent it to someone who value it more. So there's nothing I can do about that, and that's why I stopped renting the place. And because of my schedule that I'm not always here, that's why I stopped looking for another place and and just teach people in my backyard or in their backyard. Because for me, where you teach is not important at all. It's actually what you teach and how you teach it that really matters. Alright, so without further ado, let's get started. Firstly, I'm gonna basically talk about my family background, right? My dad. Now, of course, in my video on Chen Xiaowang, I've basically said that Chinese martial art, or any martial art in general, is not genetic, right? No matter how great your father is or your grandfather is, you don't naturally born with his abilities, right? Even if you are the son or grandson of a greatest master in the Chinese history, if you don't train as hard or even harder, you are not gonna get anywhere. So Kung Fu, Chinese martial art, or martial art in general, is not genetic. You have to train. You have to train and attend it by yourself. Right? So why am I talking about my father's background in martial art? Right? This is to show you that I'm not an outsider trying to peep into a close-knit circle of community. I was actually born into the martial art community in Beijing. And through my father's connection, I also gained my own social network of people in his generation as well as the current generation, which allowed me privilege on information and knowledge on various topics within the martial art community that people from outside this community, especially foreigners, will most likely have no access to. So basically, as you probably have guessed already, my father was an established martial art figure in the Chinese martial art community in Beijing. And he started training at the age of 11 under a Baiyuan Tongbei master in Niujie, which is a Beijing Muslim street. That's where all the Baiyuan Tongbei people they reside and train and teach. Then later on, he joined a Beijing opera school, where he learned the fundamentals of kicking, flipping, and stuff, although that actually doesn't have any relationship to actual Chinese martial arts, but it also gave him some foundational skills when it comes to stretching, flexibility, kicking, balance, and all of that. And then later on, Cultural Revolution happened, and due to the fact that my grandfather initially did his college in Japan, he came back as a Japanese translator, and then later on he worked for the Republic of China's government, the Kuomintang. So when the communist government took over China, he is seen as one of the five black type of people, and was in prison for 30 years. And due to that, my father was also seen as a social instability, and therefore was sent to rural areas away from Beijing. He was not allowed to stay in Beijing anymore, so he had to be sent to rural areas, into farms and factories to work. And through the whole Cultural Revolution, he was moved to many different locations outside Beijing. And through that time period, he had a lot of time on his hands, so he visited different masters from different regions and tried out different martial arts, which include Xingyi, Baji, Bagua, and as well as some other styles that are lesser known. Eventually, at the time that he was working at the factory in Chengde, right, it's basically a small town outside of Beijing, where they had a summer palace where the Qing emperor used to hang out when Beijing is too hot. While he was there, he was training in the park, and then one morning he came across a group of people who was doing a style that wasn't very well known at the time to him. It's called Shaobei, right? I've written it here. Shao referred to Shaolin, Bei is north, so Shaobei is almost a way of saying northern Shaolin, but in a less cliche way. And it doesn't refer to general northern Shaolin, but a specific style that came out of Jinzhou city, which is in the northeastern province of China. So at the time, he was still mainly focusing on Baiyuan Tongbei, and he crossed hands with those people over there, the Shaobei, and he lost, and he was convinced that Shaobei is probably a better style. I mean, I'm not here to say Shaobei is better than Baiyuan Tongbei, just for him at the time that it felt like a better style, so he joined Shaobei, and then through those people, he met their master, which is Grandmaster Li Fengjiu, who at the time works on the train as a security escort on the public train. So he traveled from place to place. His original home is also in Jinzhou, the origin place of Shaobei. But because of his nature of his work, he travels a lot. And he works on the particular train line that goes through Chengde. And that's why he, every now and then he would come to Chengde and he would teach the student, and then he would go back to Jinzhou and so forth. So through those people, my dad meet Li Fengjiu and started training Shaobei Quan. And because he was quite talented, given his previous experience as well as Beijing opera, which gave him a very supple legs, and so he's able to do a lot of good kicks. Li Fengjiu was very pleased with his progression, and therefore he wrote him a letter of recommendation and then sent him to his teacher, which is Zhang Rongshi, right? He is the grandmaster of Shaobei. So Li Fengyou is basically Zhang Rongshi's eldest student. They're almost of the same age, right? Give or take a few years. So Li Fengyou recommended my dad to go to Zhang Rongshi, and at the time, it was still pretty harsh. So my dad actually have to bring his own bags of rice, right? You go to a master's house, you can't eat their food because everyone has very little food. So my dad had to prepare his own bag of rice, and then he traveled all the way to Jinzhou. So he stayed at Zhang Rongshi's house, but he, with his own rice and his own food, basically his own supply. And he stayed there for a couple of months. And Zhang Rongshi also liked him a lot because he's very smart, he learns quick, and he's got good basic training like stubbornness and all of that. And he taught him as much as he can. And he also saw my father as one of the high potential students that might gonna help him to promote Shaobei to the rest of the country. I still have letters that they exchanged between them after my dad left Jinzhou. And from those letters, one can see that Zhang Rongshi at the time really values my dad as a member of his system. He also gave my dad a lot of he let my dad copy a lot of the manuscript of Shaobei, some of which I heard later on was actually lost from Zhang Rongshi's side. So my dad supposedly is the only one who still have a copy of the original manuscript. Anyway, so he was quite a prominent figure within the Shaobei style at the time. And even later on, when I went to Jinzhou and when I told them my dad's name, a lot of those current practitioners in the style know about it. By current, I mean people of my dad's age, right? Not my age. And then he went back to work in the factories eventually, and somewhere along the line, I think it was 1978 originally, he caught a big break in his life. There were basically a filming crew from Hong Kong that came to his factory and to other factories as well in the area looking for potential actors. And because my dad, he kind of looks quite handsome in his young days, and he has Chinese opera background, which is almost like acting, and he's was well versed in Chinese martial arts. They eventually selected him to be part of this movie project, which at the time is not very well known, but this movie later became the first hit movie that started the entire industry of Kung Fu movies in mainland China. So those of you who are Kung Fu movie fans, you probably have already guessed, my dad was part of the movie called The Shaolin Temple. It's the first Kung Fu movie filmed in mainland China after People's Republic of China was established. It's also the movie that started Jet Li's career and propelled him eventually to become the biggest Kung Fu actor internationally, right? Shaolin Temple was his first movie, so was my dad's. So while he was working on this movie, he was casted as the Tang Emperor, right? If any of you still watch that movie from time to time, you can go back and check. The one that's playing the Tang Emperor that the 13 monks were trying to save, that was my dad. And through working in this movie, he basically got to know a lot of other fellow martial artists, including Jet Li, and also got to know some of the elder people like Ma Xianda, right? He was at the time the Kung Fu consultant for the movie. Those of you that might not know, Ma Xianda is one of the most prominent Kung Fu figure that under the government, right? He was selected as one of the top 5 and top 10 influential masters of his time. He's from Xi'an, the northwestern province. The Ma family, a very well-known martial art family from there. So my dad met him through the movie, and studied Fanzi and Pi Gua under him. And he really liked my dad. Those had letter exchanges afterwards. And I think even recently, his son was still contacting my dad about stuff. My dad had a lot of social connections through being part of that movie. And because majority of the cast were from national contemporary wushu championships, so through them he also got to meet political figure within Chinese martial art world like Wu Bin, right? Those that don't know, he is the head of the Beijing Wushu team at the time. He was the teacher that trained Jet Li as well as many other national champions. He also got to meet people like Men Huifeng, Li Bingci, basically all the important martial art figures that was working under the National Sport Committee, right? He got to know them as well. And later on after the movie, although he wasn't really the lead or anything, but he also got a lot of media attention. And I remember when I was a kid, there was even fans that came from Japan, movie fans that would visit my dad and bring him gifts and take pictures and stuff. Anyway, so because of this, Later on, when he went back to Beijing, when the government decided to establish the first public martial arts school in Beijing after the Cultural Revolution, it's called Dongdan Wushu Guan, right? It was situated in the place called Dongdan, the Dongdan Martial Arts School. My dad was selected to be one of the few instructors that was able to open a public class there. And at the time, he was basically teaching Shaobei. The head of the school at the time was Grandmaster Ma Hanqing. He was a very famous palm flower and six harmony mantis master. He's also had a strong tie to the National Sport Committee and was one of the members of the group that initially drafted the Sanda rules for the modern Sanda sport. His son, Ma Lei, right, was one of the early pioneers of the Sanda sport, who eventually became the head Sanda coach of the military police section in the Chinese government. And he at the time was also basically teaching Sanda at Dongdan Wushu Guan. So based on the one end is my dad teaching Northern Shaolin, Shaobei Quan. On the other side there was Ma Lei, and they were also friends because of this. The vice headmaster of the martial arts school there is basically Li Bingci, who was a very prominent Wu style Tai Chi master. So as you can see, my dad has a lot of solid social connection with all the important martial art figures within the Beijing martial art scene at the time. Alright, so here is a picture that was taken for, this wasn't actually seen in a movie, but it was taken for promotional purpose of my dad on the left, dressed in the emperor's armor, and then versus of the main villain of the Shaolin Temple movie. I call him Uncle Yu, right? Yu Chonghui. He was also a very prominent figure, right? He passed away now. He was a very prominent figure within Chinese martial arts scene. He invented his own version of double-handed straight sword and was recognized as one of the greatest sword master of our time. So this is basically a photo of them squaring off, and it was shot for promotional purpose. And here you can see a picture of my dad dressed in his outfit and was taking pictures for other promotional purposes. But then here you can see a picture that was taken with the original crew of the Shaolin Temple after they were done a long day of shooting and they were like partying around in their accommodations. In the front, the very young looking guy, that's Jie Li. And the person that's hugging Jie Li, the one in sky blue jacket, that's my dad. And on the far left, one with the big beard, that's Uncle Yu Chonghui, right? The inventor of the modern double-handed straight sword. The one next to him that's smiling really happily, that's Uncle Sun Jiankui. He played the drunken stick master, right? The one that told Jie Li's character to eat meat, in the movie Shaolin Temple. He is actually a multiple-time national champion for men's single broadsword. And the others on the back, I don't really know their names anymore, but they're all actors that were, they were all martial art champions at the time. They were selected, and they were all played, different monks within the original movie. Well, this is a picture taken many years after the movie was shot, right? When my dad, got the time to hang out with his buddies again. Again, the one on the left, that's Uncle Sun Jiankui, right? The men's single broadsword national champion. I think later on he basically ran a martial arts school in Jinan, which is the main city of Shandong province. The one on the right, that's his nickname is Tu Ying, but his real name is Uncle Ji Chunhua. He unfortunately passed away, I think 2 years ago. Yeah, because he had a strange disease that prevented him from ever growing hair and eyebrows. Right, those all natural. He didn't shave them. He doesn't have them by default. So he always played a villain. He was one of the sidekick of the main villain. Right? The main villain was Uncle Yu, right, the one with the big beard. He played his sidekick, like the second main villain. And in the movie, he's called Tu Ying, which is the vulture. And later on, a lot of people, because of that role, they all call him to Tu Ying, even though his actual name is Uncle Ji Chunhua. And contrary to what he looks like, in movies, he's actually a very, very nice guy in real life. Very friendly, very humble. You never feel like he's a movie star at all. And those of you that might watch Kung Fu movies, you might also recognize him in many other roles. He was the main villain in The Legend of Fang Xiaoyu 2, the main villain of the new Five Ancestors of Shaolin, as well as many other movies that I'm not going to name all of them here. But if you have been watching those 80s and 90s Kung Fu movie, you definitely recognize his face. And he was always been playing villain up till 2 years ago, before he unfortunately passed away due to cancer. And Sun Yankuei also played many side villains. He was also in the new Five Ancestors of Shaolin. He was also in the original Tai Chi Zhang Sanfeng, as well as many others. Although he didn't, unlike Uncle Ji Chunhua, Uncle Sun Yankuei didn't really pursue an actual movie career. He just basically went and did a few side roles when they asked him to, but otherwise he runs a martial arts school. Alright, here's a picture taken when Uncle Sun Yankuei came to visit me while I was doing my training trip in Beijing. I think this was 2003. And here's a picture taken, I think, 3 years ago. It was just a year before Uncle Ji Chunhua passed away. It was a gathering that happened in Beijing. Because the one in the middle was a bald head, the two bald head, right? The one that dressed in white, that's my dad. The one on his right, that's Uncle Ji Chunhua, right? The one who was playing villain. The one on the right of Uncle Ji Chunhua, that's Uncle Tang Laiwei. He's not in movies, but he was a multiple-time men's single spear champion, national champion, and he studied in the Shizhahai Sport Academy. That's one of the most prestigious sport academies in Beijing as well as in entire China. That's where Jet Li came from, and that's where Wu Bin and all these other important figures used to teach at. And in fact, Uncle Tang was one of the original members of that wushu class in Shizhahai Sport Academy, as well as the original member of the Beijing wushu team. Right, it's one of the most famous contemporary wushu teams in entire China at the time. He was one of the original members. He since the 80s has been staying in Australia, I believe in Melbourne, and he runs a Chinese martial arts school there. The one on my dad's left, the one with the cyber mustache, that's Uncle Xu Xiangdong. He was also from Shizhahai Sport Academy, one of the original members, as well as the original members of the first Beijing wushu team. He was a national champion for men's eagle claw form. Right, so a lot of you who have seen those old documentary of the Beijing wushu team will definitely recognize him. And he also played in a couple of movies, like this one quite classic movie called Shaolin and Wudang and Wudang Invasion. The one next to him, if you've been following my channel, you should recognize him. That's one of my closest Taiji brother, Li Jin, and obviously the one next to him, that's me. Right, and this is a picture taken a couple years ago with another uncle. His name is Uncle Liang Changxing. Right, he was the multiple times men's Xingyi form national champion. Also graduated from the original class in Shizhahai Shizhahai Sport Academy, as well as one of the original members of Beijing wushu team. And he also lives in Australia. But he travels frequently between Australia and China, and I was able to spend time with him every time he happened to be in China when I'm also visiting China for my training trip. So obviously, right, somebody might be thinking, right, knowing these people doesn't make me a great martial artist. Of course it doesn't, right? So the point of this portion of the video is just to show that I didn't make up the stuff that I shared in my videos. I didn't suck them out of my ass, okay? I actually got this knowledge and information from various figures within the Chinese martial community in Beijing who knew the people, interacted with them, spent time with them back in the days, and were able to tell me things that others might not know. Right? Ever since I was a small kid, I've been following my dad around when he go and hang out with his martial art buddies, and they will be talking about martial art politics, martial art drama, martial art relationship, whatever, and I used to listen to all of those stories. And that's where I initially got all my knowledge from. And when I got older, and as I got to meet these uncles myself, I also asked them about things that I've heard back then, confirm certain things. So I'm not saying that everything I say is definitely the truth, but it's far likely to be more closer to the truth than what you read on some website or Wikipedia, right? Because these people actually knows those people that I talk about, back in those days. They've seen them, and they've interacted with them. They spend time with them, and they know what happened back then between so and so and so and so other. Alright, so that's what I was saying. Knowing martial art figures, my father being a martial artist, doesn't make me a good martial artist. That's definitely the truth. So let's, next let's look at my own journey in Chinese martial arts.